Hey, storyteller. Have you ever read a scene in which it felt like the author was making you play musical chairs with the characters' perspectives? You start out connecting with one character, living the story through her eyes. Then you jump into the thoughts of another character. While you're still reeling from that switch, you're thrown into the emotions of the first character, or those of another person entirely. That's what we call head hopping. It's jarring, often causes confusion, and sabotages a reader's close connection with a particular character. Welcome to this week's writer coaching session, in which we'll not only discuss why head hopping is bad for your story and how to fix it, but we'll go into workshop mode and revise part of a scene from a real story. Hi, I'm Bridget from B Squared Writer Coaching. I'm an author, editor, and your story coach, here to help you make your story powerful, polished, and publishable so you can move readers and help them experience your character's journey with maximum emotional impact. First, I have a gift for you just for visiting my channel, the Ultimate Guide to Dialogue Punctuation. Even if you correct all the head hopping in your story, but still punctuate dialogue incorrectly, readers can become confused and fail to feel the intensity of the emotion behind the conversation. This easy-to-follow guide will help you structure interrupted conversations, stammering, trailing speech, and other dialogue quirks so you can ramp up the emotional intensity even for a non-viewpoint character who's speaking without having to jump into that character's head. Just click the link in the description or visit b2writercoaching.com/dialogue. That's the letter B, the number 2, writercoaching.com/dialogue to download your copy. And watch the video all the way to the end so you won't miss this week's Power Up, a super practical action step you can take right now in the scene you're working on. Before we get into a deeper explanation of what head hopping is and why it's bad for your story, it's important to explore what head hopping is not. First of all, we're not talking about switching point of view in a new scene. That's a legitimate way to structure a story told from the perspectives of more than one character. Think of a romance novel, for example, in which you have the point of view of the male lead and the female lead, and you alternate either between chapters or between scenes in the same chapter. As long as the scene is written from the perspective of a single viewpoint character and doesn't stray into the thoughts, emotions, or reactions of another character, it isn't head hopping. The important thing to remember is when you're going to switch point of view, be sure to include a scene break, make sure that scene has a definite conclusion, and create a clear transition into the head of the new character at the beginning of the next scene. Another scenario that is not head hopping is a story written in omniscient point of view. Yes, in omniscient point of view, in any given scene, the narrator may hop into a different character's head to reveal their thoughts, emotions, and so forth. But the difference is the type of narrator telling the story. In omniscient point of view, the narrator is not a character in the story. He or she is an outsider, a godlike figure looking down on the story from above who knows everything and only chooses to reveal certain things to the reader. This narrator, in general, is not emotionally invested in the outcome of the story, although good omniscient narrators will have opinions and personality that comes through, but they don't really have stakes in the story usually. Writing an omniscient point of view may seem like an easy way to avoid head hopping, but it honestly isn't easy to write well. Plus, most major publishers and readers aren't fans of omniscient point of view these days. It's sort of gone out of fashion in the writing community. Another drawback to using omniscient point of view is the reader never becomes really close to any particular character and doesn't feel truly connected with anyone. When you write a scene from the close perspective of a particular character, the reader has a chance to really identify with that person and relate to him or her, feel his emotions, and connect on a deep level. In omniscient point of view, we may be jumping around and knowing what each person's thinking, but we never feel like we're living the story through that character's eyes because we don't stay in one place long enough. Distinguishing between omniscient point of view and the other types of third person can be tricky because they all use pronouns like he, she, and they to indicate the characters. However, keep in mind that an omniscient narrator is not part of the story. In third person limited point of view, we have a deep dive into the perspective of a particular character in each scene. In third person distant point of view, we really don't get the thoughts and emotions of any character. It's like we're just standing back watching something happen, and we really feel less connected, even often than omniscient point of view. Head hopping occurs when a person is using third person limited or first person point of view, in which you use I, me, and my to indicate the characters. If you're finding this information helpful, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you won't miss future writer coaching sessions. Now let's get into what head hopping is and why it's not a good idea. Head hopping occurs in a story written in first person point of view or a third person limited point of view, in which the author reveals the emotions, realizations, awareness, internal physical responses, and other inward reactions of a non viewpoint character, so a character whose perspective we are not in for the scene. Why is head hopping bad? Well, it can cause confusion for readers and make them have to reread passages to figure out, wait a minute, who's thinking this? Or whose emotions is the author talking about here? It can also break or dilute the connection the reader feels with the viewpoint character. And it reminds the reader that he or she is not living the story, but being told the story. And let's be honest, most of the time, head hopping is just lazy writing. There's no need to state the thoughts and emotions of a non viewpoint character. Keep this in mind as a way to remember not to head hop. When you're writing a scene from a particular character's perspective, nothing in that scene can be revealed to the reader that that character doesn't know. So, for example, if I'm your viewpoint character, I wouldn't know what you're thinking right now if you're the other character in the scene. Unless, of course, I have telepathy. And then, well, that would have to be part of the story world. And there's a whole different reason for using that, but it's not head hopping. Most stories don't have characters with telepathy, so it's not going to work. Just as with anything else in a scene told from a particular character's point of view, everything has to be filtered through that character's awareness and perspective. If you want to show that a non viewpoint character is experiencing a particular emotion, well, then how would the viewpoint character know this emotion is going on for that other character? We can use body language, we can use facial expression, dialogue, tone of voice, actions. A character who slams his fist on the table is obviously angry or frustrated or something similar. We never have to state that emotion or jump into that other character's head to reveal it. One helpful exercise is to consider, if you were the viewpoint character, how would you know the other person is feeling or thinking a specific thing? Now, I promised you a workshop session, so let's look at an example of head hopping in a real story. Okay, for this example of head hopping, I've taken the first few paragraphs of a story a friend wrote and changed the names of the characters and a few other minor details to create a better example for us. So let's take a look at it. First, we'll read the example in its entirety and then we'll break it apart and look at which pieces create the head hopping. Nicole loved sitting in the courtyard to practice spinning and create patterns for weaving. At 12 years old, she was learning to weave her own designs and spin yarn with the proficiency of an adult. During the noon sun, branches from the towering cypress tree provided the perfect shade, allowing her to spin outside all day if she wanted. "Hello," sang Jessica as she opened the front door. Abby turned, sharp and quick, her heart pounding. "Oh, Mother, it's you. I didn't hear you." "You were so deep in thought you didn't hear me knock?" Jessica asked, lightly touching her right cheek to her daughter's, then the left. "I was making sure Nicole is safe." "Safe? Safe from what?" Abby shrugged. Oh, it's nothing." "Where is Nicole? I have her birthday present." "Oh, she'll love that. She's in the courtyard." Okay, let's dissect this and find out why it is considered head hopping. The first paragraph is written from Nicole's perspective, and we know this because of the words you see highlighted in white and underlined. Nicole loved sitting in the courtyard to practice spinning. Loved is the emotion that she feels, and the author is actually naming her emotion here, which is a topic for another video, but it's best to show the emotion instead of telling. This whole paragraph really is telling instead of showing. It's sort of like an outside narrator telling us all this about Nicole. But you can see in this paragraph, we really are focused on her. It feels like we're in her head. Then we have some more telling. At 12 years old, she was learning to weave her own designs. So, was learning, we have that highlighted here. It isn't technically head hopping. We're not really in her direct thoughts here, but it does anchor us more in her mindset. We know she's learning these things. Anyone else could know that as well, anyone who knows her could be aware of this, but it really keeps us grounded in her mindset. The next thing we have highlighted is if she wanted in the last sentence. The shade would allow her to spin outside all day if she wanted. Again, that is more telling than head hopping, but it does keep us in her mindset. She is thinking these things, or at least that seems to be the author's intention with this paragraph. However, we don't stay in Nicole's point of view. "Hello," sang Jessica as she opened the front door. Okay, well, sure, Nicole could see Jessica open the front door depending on where she is in proximity to the front door, so that isn't technically head hopping. However, we find out later in the story that when Jessica asks Abby where Nicole is, we know that they are not in the same place at this point. Nicole isn't just outside the front door. She's in the courtyard, which is to the side or the back of the house. In showing Jessica open the front door, we have head hopped into someone else's perspective because Nicole couldn't possibly see Jessica enter. The next part we have highlighted here is her heart pounding. So Abby turned sharp and quick, her heart pounding. A pounding heart is an internal physical response. Only the person whose heart is pounding is aware of it. So now we've switched into Abby's point of view because the author has revealed to us what's going on inside her body. So we've gone from Nicole to Jessica, now to Abby. The one good thing about her heart pounding is that the author uses an internal physical response to show Abby's emotion instead of naming it. And the next thing we have is her daughters highlighted here. So Jessica is questioning whether Abby didn't hear her. Before we get to the head hopping part, there are a couple of minor writerly mistakes going on here. So Abby's line ended with, "Oh, mother, it's you. I didn't hear you." It ends with the word you, and the very next sentence, Jessica's line, "You were so deep in thought," starts with the word you. It is not advisable to do this because it creates an echo in the mind of the reader, having the word you back to back like that. So I would suggest revising the sentence, which we'll see a version of that when we look at the revision. Also, "You didn't hear me knock." Well, we already have "didn't hear" in Abby's line. We know that already that Abby didn't hear her. Abby said she didn't hear her. So this is another repetition that we could avoid. Okay, now to the head hopping. So Jessica asked, lightly touching her right cheek to her daughters. The use of her daughters here indicates that we would be in Jessica's head again, because Abby wouldn't think that Jessica's touching her cheek to her daughters because Abby is Jessica's daughter. So we would need to change this wording if we're in Abby's point of view. I happen to know, however, from the author that her intention is for this scene to be in Jessica's point of view all the way through. So we will have to look at how to revise that to make this more clear to the reader. Before we get to that revision, let's talk about the different techniques we can use to eliminate head hopping. Now that we've seen what head hopping is, how can we fix it? Well, first, as we said earlier, we need to avoid showing a non viewpoint character's thoughts, realizations, or other things that go on in that character's mind, unless the character voices those things. So, if it's okay for your viewpoint character to know what this other person's thinking, then just have the character say the thing out loud instead of thinking it. You can also use facial expressions to show that the non viewpoint character has realized something, like an aha moment, and it's up to you whether you reveal what that realization is to the viewpoint character by the other person saying what they've discovered. That will depend on whether the viewpoint character needs to know what the other person is thinking or has discovered. In a situation in which you don't want your viewpoint character to know what the other person has realized or discovered, then either just cut it or you might have to switch point of view for that scene and do the scene from the point of view of the character who's having the realization. Only if that fits the story, though. If your viewpoint character, your original one, is the only viewpoint character in your whole story, switching point of view isn't going to work because it would be jarring to have a single scene in this other person's perspective just in order to get this one piece of information across. Another thing to avoid is showing a non-viewpoint character's internal physical responses. These are reactions of the body that happen inside, such as a person's throat closing up, their stomach churning, a chill running down their back, their shoulders tightening. Now, you can show us a person's posture stiffen from another character's perspective because we can see that, but the shoulders tensing, that is something that a person feels. Those kinds of things you would not be able to show unless the scene is written in that character's perspective. Also, we wouldn't want to show the emotions of a non-viewpoint character unless we use body language or facial expressions, dialogue, tone of voice, action. We wouldn't show the emotions going on in that character's head unless the scene is told from that character's perspective. We also don't want to reveal the things that a non-viewpoint character is noticing or becoming aware of. It's sort of like what we talked about earlier with realizations. The same principle applies. Words like wondered, felt, realized, noticed, those should be avoided as they create head hopping, but they are also what we call filter words, and they create a barrier between the reader and the character. But that's a topic for another video. When you discover head hopping in a scene, ask yourself this question: is the information essential to the scene or to the story? If so, why? And can you still convey that information through the perspective of your viewpoint character instead of jumping into the head of the other person to do it? If not, and it is essential information, consider revealing it in another way, perhaps in a different scene in which the other character is the point of view character, and so you can reveal it that way. Or have that character tell someone else in a scene. So there are several ways you can do this. Now let's finish our workshop and go back to my computer to revise the example we looked at earlier. All right, we're ready to revise the example we looked at earlier using the techniques we've just discussed. I will read through the revision in its entirety, and then we'll go back and look at these highlighted sections that I've changed and discuss why I made the wording changes I did. Hello, Jessica sang as she opened her daughter's front door. Across the room, Abby turned from the window, sharp and quick, flattening a hand to her chest. Oh, Mother, it's you. I didn't hear you. Jessica shook her head, shuffling into the house. Were you so deep in thought? I did knock. She closed the distance and lightly touched her right cheek to Abby's, then the left. I was making sure Nicole is safe, Abby said, glancing back to the window. Jessica frowned. Safe? Safe from what? Abby shrugged. It's nothing. Where is Nicole? I have her birthday present. She'll love that. Abby waved to the window. She's in the courtyard. Jessica peered out at her granddaughter, seated at the spinning wheel beneath the towering cypress tree, with the noon sun baking the top of her head. She has enough shade, Abby said. It's her delight. I can't keep her from spinning or weaving, especially now that she's learning to create her own design patterns. Already? Jessica asked, straightening. She's only 12. Abby smiled, though it failed to lighten her eyes. She spins yarn with the proficiency of an adult. If only she made friends as easily. All right, we're going to backtrack and look at what I've changed and why. First of all, we've completely cut out Nicole's opening paragraph. We don't need her point of view. And on the next page of the slide, you'll see how I worked in the information that might be necessary from that paragraph in Jessica's point of view and in their conversations instead. So we start with Jessica. Just a note, it's a good idea to start your scene with your viewpoint character. That gives the reader a clue as to whose head we're going to be in and which character the reader should be identifying with in the scene. Hello, Jessica sang as she opened her daughter's front door. So I've qualified the relationship right up front. We've used her daughter's to indicate that she is at her daughter's house. That gives the reader not only an indication of the relationship between the characters, but also a grounding in the setting. Where are we in this scene? Across the room, Abby turned from the window, sharp and quick, flattening a hand to her chest. Okay, well, I've added across the room and the fact that Abby's turning from the window. That also grounds us in the setting. It helps us to see where the characters are in relation to each other and a bit of the house. Abby was looking out the window at her daughter, who is sitting in the courtyard. We didn't know this from the snippet that we had for the example, but it is revealed a little bit later in the story. And instead of her heart pounding, she flattened her hand to her chest. That gives us an indication that maybe her heart was racing, or at least that she was startled. This is using body language instead of internal physical response. The two are related, but body language is something that the viewpoint character, who is Jessica in this scene, could see. She can perceive and observe these things that are happening with Abby. Whereas Abby's heart pounding, Jessica wouldn't know that. And then we have her line from before. Jessica shook her head. I added this to anchor us in Jessica's point of view again, to make sure that the reader knows whose head we are supposed to be in. Plus, it gives Jessica some action. Also, shuffling into the house shows that Jessica is moving from the door. In the original example, she seemed to stay in the doorway, and then suddenly she's touching her cheek to Abby's. Well, who moved? Did Jessica move toward Abby, or did Abby come toward her mother? We don't know that. It's like one of them just teleported. So we want to show that action. Another thing this does for our couple paragraphs here is, since Abby's line ended with "I didn't hear you," remember from before we had the word "you" ending the paragraph and then starting Jessica's with her line "You didn't hear me knock." So we've changed that. Now we have Jessica shook her head, so we don't have "you" being used back to back. And instead of repeating the "didn't hear" part, and instead of Jessica saying "you didn't hear me knock," since we already know Abby didn't, we've changed the wording here. "Were you so deep in thought? I did knock." So we get in the indication that Jessica knocked. It's like she's emphasizing it. "I did knock," meaning I was doing the polite thing here. I knocked. Why didn't you hear that? And then we show again Jessica approach her daughter. She had shuffled into the house, but we don't know how close they are since Abby was across the room at the window. She closed the distance and lightly touched her right cheek to Abby's, then the left. We don't need to use her daughters here because we already know from the first sentence that Abby is her daughter. "I was making sure Nicole is safe," Abby said, glancing back at the window. I've added the action here to indicate where Nicole is before Abby says it. It also shows why Abby was standing by the window. Jessica frowned. Now, this I added because it indicates that Jessica is puzzled. It's showing a little bit of her emotion without telling, showing it with body language to indicate that this bothers her. She's safe? What do you mean, safe? So, this, along with the dialogue, shows how strange it is for Abby to say she wanted to make sure her daughter was safe. We find out in a moment that Nicole was in the courtyard of their own house, so why wouldn't that be safe? This story is one of a girl who's dealing with something pretty scary. That's something we find out later in the story, but it gives the reader a little clue, some foreshadowing of what will be revealed a little later. So that's really well done. Now let's look at the rest of this. Jessica just asked Abby where Nicole is and said she has a birthday present for her. So Abby says she'll love that. Abby waved to the window. She's in the courtyard. So now again, Abby is indicating where Nicole is and that we can see her through the window. I changed a lot more than what's highlighted in this section, but these are highlighted to mainly show the information that was originally in the opening paragraph that we cut. The original excerpt from the story ends with "she's in the courtyard." I added the rest of this in order to get the information in from that opening paragraph that we may need for the rest of the story. Jessica peered out at her granddaughter, seated at the spinning wheel beneath the towering cypress tree. So now we see the setting. Nicole was sitting under the tree and she's spinning. She's sitting at the spinning wheel. That's how we know what she's doing. And then Jessica's line, "with the noon sun baking the top of her head." So this indicates the time of day and that it's odd for Nicole, or should be odd for Nicole, to be out in the heat. And then Abby's line adds to this, "she has enough shade." And that was from the original paragraph, that the cypress tree creates enough shade. Abby said, "It's her one delight. I can't keep her from spinning or weaving, especially now that she's learning to create her own design patterns." So this is how we indicate that Nicole loves spinning or weaving. It's her delight. Abby can't keep her daughter from doing it. She loves it so much. So we see that emotion that Nicole was expressing in her opening paragraph, that she loves doing this without having to say she loves it. We could actually cut "it's her delight." That is a little bit of telling. It's okay in dialogue, but it does sort of tell what her emotion is. If we wanted to, we could go straight to, "I can't keep her from spinning or weaving, especially now that she's learning to create her own design patterns." And then we learn that her age, when Jessica says "already," she's only 12. The opening paragraph just says, at 12 years old, she was learning to spin yarn with the proficiency of an adult. This is much stronger. It makes a clear distinction that this is unusual for a girl of this age to be that good. And then in the last paragraph, we have Abby smiled, though it failed to lighten her eyes. That I added because it indicates Abby's emotions. She is troubled because of whatever's going on with Nicole. The reader will find out what that is later, but this is another hint, and it's still in Jessica's point of view. It's hinting at Abby's emotions, but through Jessica's perspective, because Jessica sees Abby smile, and she can also see that that smile doesn't reach her eyes. It doesn't lighten her eyes. It failed to reach her eyes would be kind of cliche, but saying it failed to lighten her eyes shows that her eyes are dark or dull for some reason, and that gives us further hint at her emotions. And then her line, she spins yarn with the proficiency of an adult. That is straight from the opening paragraph, but now Abby is sort of getting to brag about her daughter a little bit. And then I added, if only she made friends as easily. This is something the author had indicated wanting to include in the story, but wasn't sure where or how to put it. So it also shows another thing Abby's worried about. This isn't the only thing she's worried about, but it gives the reader a hint that Nicole is quite solitary. And there are reasons for it the reader will find out a little later. I hope you found this example and its revision helpful in figuring out how to eliminate head hopping from your scenes. If you haven't done so already, don't forget to download your Ultimate Guide to Dialogue Punctuation so you can keep readers grounded in your characters' conversations as well as the right person's head. Just click the link in the description or visit b2writercoaching.com/dialogue. For today's Power Up, examine a scene in your story and highlight any instances where you have revealed the thoughts, emotions, awareness, internal physical responses, or things that a non-viewpoint character notices or realizes. Then ask yourself the question, is this information crucial to the story or the scene, and is there a way that I can convey it through the perspective and experiences of the viewpoint character instead? If the information is necessary, try revising it so that it can be conveyed through the experiences and perceptions of the viewpoint character. If the viewpoint character isn't supposed to know this information, then do consider writing the scene from the perspective of the other character so that you can convey the information to the reader without breaking the secrecy you need to maintain from the viewpoint character. If it isn't all that crucial, or if you are sticking to one point of view for your whole story, you may just need to cut that information and come up with a different way to have it revealed and not show it to the reader until a viewpoint character finds out about it as well. The things a character says can keep us just as grounded in their heads as their thoughts and emotions can, or cause as much confusion as head hopping does. So by request, next week's writer coaching session will take us on a deep dive of dialogue structure, all the parts of dialogue and how to use them most effectively. So be sure to hit the subscribe button and notification bell so you won't miss it. Since point of view is one of the basic elements of storytelling, today's video is part of the Building Blocks of Story playlist, linked here and down below in the description. Be sure to check it out for more tips and training on the most essential elements of stories. And in case you missed last week's writer coaching session, check out this video on the one thing every scene needs. Until next time, let's power up your storytelling.